And we are recording. What is going on with everybody? It is your boy, Eric, aka Young God, coming to you live in the Green Dungeon, giving it to you real, raw, and rugged. And I have a very, 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 very special guest on the other line. Um, I will let the man introduce himself. Who do we have here today?
Okay. I'm Johan Grimonprez, filmmaker based in Brussels and Greece. I used to live in New York. I used to teach a bit in New York, but been back and forth, but now back in Europe. And director of soundtrack to Coup d'etat, which I guess we'll be talking about, I presume.
No, for sure. So, for people that don't know, we have been trying to set this interview up for so long, and I want to thank him publicly, as I just did offline, for sticking with it because he could have easily just been like, "Yeah, I've been trying to set this interview up, and it hasn't happened. I'm not doing this anymore." He could have just easily just told me to kick rocks, but he did not. He stuck with it, and we finally got this set up. And I want to publicly thank you for that. That meant a lot because, truthfully be told, I haven't told you this yet. This documentary is probably one of my favorite documentaries of all time. One of my
Oh,
favorite documentaries ever. And I
oh
love
my God.
documentaries.
Okay. Okay. Oh my
I
God. All
love
right.
documentaries. I'm a big documentary person, rather it be whatever genre. I'm very interested in documentaries. And I guess I'll take a step back and tell you how this even came about, like how I found the
Mm-hmm,
documentary.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I I like to call myself I'm like a fake movie head. Like I try to watch all the movies. I don't even end up watching a lot of the movies that come out in the year that they come out in. But I watched the Oscars and I saw your documentary pop up. And I'm a big believer that it's cover art is super important. Rather if it's for a movie, for a book, for an album, if the cover art intrigues me, I'm like, that's interesting. I had no clue what the movie was about. Then when I look into it, I realized that this movie slightly tied into my 11th grade year in high school. So,
Okay.
you see, follow me, follow me. So in 11th grade, I was on Google just looking up stuff, and I found out about King Leopold,
Oh,
and I'm like, this is interesting, and I see that he's cutting off the hands of some of the essentially like slaves that he had, like the people in the Congo. And I'm like, this is crazy. Why don't we learn about this in school? So the next day, I went to my 11th grade history teacher, Mr. Evans, and I remember going up to him and asking him, "Hey, Mr. Evans, after class, do you know who this is?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Why don't you teach about this? Like, I feel like this is we teach about all these other like atrocities and these monsters. I feel like this guy is like a real monster." And he just went into a long thing about just how the curriculum doesn't allow it, and if I was really interested in, like, we'll probably learn more about it in college. So fast forward, when I seen that he was mentioned, I'm like, I have to watch this and learn more about him and Patrice Lumumba. And I think you did such an amazing job just telling the stories of multiple people, rather if it's for Patrice Lumumba, rather if you what's going on in the Black civil rights movement in America, rather if it's going on in Belgium at the time. I feel like you told five, six, seven different perspectives at once, and that's why I think that you did one of my favorite jobs ever. And yeah, I just wanted to say that before we really got into this. One of my favorite documentaries ever because I haven't seen too many documentaries that tells so many different perspectives, conflicting perspectives. These people are opposing each other, and you tell it in such an articulate, intriguing way. I loved it.
wow, that's sweet to hear, especially from the African American community, because I was afraid to be grilled as a white privileged Belgian, right? But anyway, I first of hand I have to say it's not because I'm not born in Gaza or I'm not born in East Congo that I cannot speak up in solidarity, right? So, and you just mentioned Leopold II. It's the same for us in Belgium. We were not taught this story. It was completely sort of twisted the way I thought about it. What Adam Hochschild's book, The Ghosts of Leopold II, was published, it caused a huge uproar. And then a subsequent book by Ludo de Witt, The Assassination of Patrice Lumumba, that also, there was new evidence coming out. It was published that actually the Belgian government was really involved, that it was not an internal conflict that killed Patrice Lumumba, but that actually there was a machinery of an elite and the Belgian government, including President Eisenhower, because this was in cahoots with, of course, the CIA and Belgium branding Patrice Lumumba as a communist, although the beginning of the film, he immediately says, I'm not a communist. I always have to laugh with this. And first of all, an African. And it's because he stood up for his country that actually the riches of the continent and the riches of the Congo would also benefit the population. So, but we didn't learn about this in school at all. So for me, it was also a learning curve. And I do believe that trauma is shared. It's shared by the perpetrator as well as the perpetrated upon. And I think if the history of my country, which it's really a black page out of the history of my country, you don't move forward if you cannot go beyond that. And I feel, Belgium is younger than the United States, by the way. If you guys behave like a teenager, we're behaving like a toddler. And I feel, the Congo as a story, the DR Congo is intrinsically linked to the history of Belgium. You walk through Brussels, here where I am, and everything is built with rubber money. The Palais de Justice, the Palais Royal, the avenues are all laid out by Leopold II. But I often say that, very often the discussion sort of sometimes get stuck with Leopold II. I have to say, I did not want my film to be a nostalgic trap, because what's going on in the East Congo today, you're talking about the Oscars, the film was nominated, but when I went to the Oscars, I invited Zap Mama, Marie Doon. She's the Congolese Belgian singer from Belgium, who actually embodied the voice of André Blouin, the Pan-African rebel who's featured in the film. And she was in constant contact with East Congo, with Denis Mukwege. And Denis Mukwege is the doctor that already operated on 80,000 plus women that were raped in East Congo. And he had to flee. And it was precisely the moment of the Oscars where actually M23, with actually in cahoots with the Rwanda leader Kagame, where Rwandan troops are embedded in the M23, invaded East Congo. And Dr. Denis Mukwege had to flee. And, it's exactly M23 that is responsible for all the raped women. You have to know there's 10 women raped every minute today in the Congo. We can talk about Gaza and Gaza in the news, but people don't even dare to speak up, against the genocide in Gaza. But Congo is sometimes out of the picture. And so if one starts talking about Leopold II, often it's a way of not talking about what's going on today. So I think that's absolutely crucial also to mention when it comes to the film. That's also why the iPhone commercial and the Tesla is in there, because it alludes to, we're all implicated with our, batteries that are in our social media apparatus, where the coltan and the lithium is sort of slouched across the border. And that's what also caused this whole sort of, in the 90s, with the conflict minerals that caused the whole sort of African world war in the 90s with Kabila and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why you have in the City of Joy all these women that actually have been sort of, disgraced and are they wouldn't allow that to be called as such, because they're really through music and trauma, because that Mama just came back from City of Joy when we recorded The Voice. She sort of helped in a way how those raped women were actually taking music, and that's at the core of this film, the music and theater as a way to transform their trauma to become activists. And the other ones holding the leadership in the Congo accountable. But, when we were with that Mama and Marie Doon at the Oscars, she had made a dress with a big slogan, Free Congo, and she would have made a statement about precisely, what's going on in the East Congo. Anyway, I wanted to mention that because it's for me crucial that the film doesn't stay as a nostalgic trap out there, but there's also something that is still lingering today and it has not disappeared, what was set in motion and what has been sort of explored and traced and dismantled in the film.
So you said a lot that I want to comment on, but I want to stick with current day Congo, because I've seen a bunch of your interviews where you make it a mission of yours to talk about, this isn't just past stuff. There's also tragedies going today currently in the Congo. So let's say somebody watching this, like you said, a lot of times it is left out of the conversation. Let's say somebody's watching this and they don't know what's going on in the Congo. Could you explain what exactly is going on in the Congo today that is the atrocities that's happening?
Well, of course, Congo is a huge territory. If you put Congo on the map of Europe or even the United States, it would cover a big part. It's nearly a continent. So, but I'm talking specifically now of the Goma area, the area which is bordering Rwanda. Of course, in Katanga, it's also a bit, there's a lot of sort of slouching the richness, because in a nutshell, it's basically that in a neo-colonial grab, right, that and what's set in motion in the film in the 60s as how the West was about to deal with this independence movement on the continent of Africa, how the West was about to try to hold control in a neo-colonial grab to the riches of the United I was about to say United States of Africa. That's like a Freudian mislapse, but it's part of the film. But that neo-colonial grab that happened in the 60s by way of the ground zero of assassinating Patrice Lumumba has not disappeared. Like, for example, when the new evidence came out with the book of Ludo de Witte in 1999, there was a parliamentary commission in Belgium, and the evidence was there. Partially that is also in the film, that the monarchy was involved, or at least in the know that the government was definitely involved. The film ends with the statement that actually there was a complicity of the Belgian government. But what was put in motion then is actually in another way even worse what's going on today. Of course, we had the world war that actually was launched with sort of subsequently to what was happening with Mobutu dethroned and Kabila and his son taking power. You had sort of the whole opening of the border with Rwanda, and then you had a lot of skirmishes, what was going on with the Rwanda border. But what's really at stake is the riches. It's the coltan, the lithium. There's gold. There's gold in the Kivu province, which is slashed off also through Rwanda to Saudi Arabia. The coltan is slashed off as a conflict mineral to China, and then it ends up in our iPhone, and then Apple can wash their hands and say, "Oh, we just bought it there. We have nothing to do with it." But it's basically again that template of the riches. And we can talk Sudan, we can talk Yemen, we can talk Gaza. How many people know there's a huge gas deposit in front of Gaza that belongs to the Palestinians? And that's what at stake. It's not about, it's like what Lumumba says. It's not like this story when he talks about union minière is not about people's lives. It's actually about getting access to the riches. And as Kwame Nkrumah says in the film as well, Africa is not poor, it's the Africans that are poor. And when somebody stands up that actually that the riches should also benefit the population, then that's not, appreciated, of course. Yeah. So I think that's a bit what's going on, and that hasn't disappeared. The template has not disappeared, and it's the template is, it's the way sort of the word is structured, how actually what Chris Hedges would call a corporate coup d'etat. We live in a corporatocracy, and it's a corporate lobby system that actually also dictating what foreign policy is all about. And the UN is instrumentalized. The United States government is instrumentalized. There are more lobbyists in Brussels than actually European parliamentarians. So I would call it the corporatocracy that has a hold on how, for example, the European Parliament is actually helping Kagame and sustaining this whole riches that coming from Rwanda. But Rwanda doesn't have gold. Rwanda doesn't have the lithium. It comes from across the border through the private militias that helping slashing of those conflict minerals out of the Congo. I hope this is a bit clear. I was a little
No. I'm getting it all. It's interesting because I said this recently. The fact that people are talking about Gaza is like a great thing. What's going on in Palestine, but it does seem that certain other things in that vicinity are getting lost, like Congo, like you brought up Yemen, Sudan. Most people don't even know what's going on in Tigray in East Africa. It's a lot of tragedies going on. So I guess generally speaking with all those, but more so Congo, because that's what you speak about a lot. Why do you think that is forgotten about and not talked about as much?
Well, it doesn't benefit the sort of mainstream media that is in cahoots with sort of the whole corporatocracy. And so you don't hear about it in the UN because that's also instrumentalized. Denis Mukwege, for years, Denis Mukwege was trying to hold accountable the persons responsible for the genocide in East Congo. And he has not achieved actually the means that in the UN that would be opened up. It's changing, because recently there's a bit of a change that is happening where they would hold Kabila accountable. But it's funny, today Trump said, Congolese are not welcome anymore. They can't get a tourist visa as of today, So why is that? You know, why is a richer nation deciding about borders? Why do we have borders at all? Pollution, pollution has more rights than civilians. It can cross borders. So it's a bit of a sort of an upside down world we're living in.
Hey, I never thought about it. That pollution does have more rights than certain citizens. You're right. It just
It is.
yeah,
It's
that's crazy. That's crazy. It's one of those things where I feel like this documentary does a great job at teaching and enlightening people. And when it comes to teaching, so like I'm currently a college student and super big on citations. You know, when you're writing a paper, you have to cite, you have to cite. If you don't cite, you get a lot of points marked off. I thought it was interesting that you put the footnotes within the within the film, like not in the credits or not at the end. You put like the footnotes, what page you did, like a you do APA format as they would call it over here. Like, and it's super interesting too that you APA'd it in the movie. I was like, I've never seen this before. What what went into that, I guess, artistic style to put it in the actual film and at the end of the movie where probably nobody will see it?
Yeah, it's funny. I often laugh about it. It's an academic PDF disguised as a feature music clip. But I knew I would get grilled in Belgium. If you have, because this is evidence. I didn't concoct this. It's a big part is from Ludo de Witte's book, The Assassination of Patrice Lumumba, who actually dug up new evidence that also the Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN Secretary General, was actually complicit with the overthrow of Patrice Lumumba. This is new evidence that came out, but also that actually, indeed, the Belgian government was involved, and he actually names all the cables as well. And so I knew I would get grilled. So making it stems from the previous film, because I made a film on the corruption in the global arms trade, which is a pleonasm on itself anyway. There's no corrupt deal in any arms deal or there's no arms deal that doesn't have a component of corruption, as Andrew Feinstein, the writer I worked with on this film. And so this was sort of a different beast where we had to make sure that every element in the film was vetted, because we knew we would get grilled, say, for example, by Lockheed Martin, because we were criticizing Lockheed Martin. And from there, I learned that actually, if you make sort of these statements, you're going to get hugely attacked. And so by preempting the attack and the criticism, I thought, okay, let's get the sources in there, because, otherwise it would be too sort of on a tangent where people could criticize me and say, oh, you make this all up. But it's actually, it creates sort of, in a very short way, that you can give credence to the sources that you actually put in the film. And not only your page number, it's very often also, the cable numbers of the cables that were sent, the telegrams, the notes. So, and it was absolutely crucial to get the evidence out there. So, and I like it that actually, the film can be used. It's also on Canopy in the United States, so academic students can actually have access. Or if you have a library card, public library card, you can have access. So I like that actually there's an access. But I hope it's not just, for me, the film is also a bit of clash of genres. It's not just only academic. It starts off more as a comedy, or even as sort of the joy of try to imagine what that independence must have been and how that hope was then smashed. But then sort of there's I wouldn't say that hope is smashed, because the hope turns into anger, and the anger that actually is even for me a celebration of life. When Abraham Lincoln is screaming, it's saying, we're still here, we're alive, but we don't agree with the situation in the world. But so I hope that the film is not just academic. It's also, in a sense, goes from a comedy or a sense of joy that the music brings, to more of a thriller element where it becomes really a nightmare. With Leonie Abo talking about, horrible things that mercenaries like committed, and the genocide that is still not acknowledged in Belgium as well. So, but the
Yeah.
music, for me, the music is very much, there's this two sort of strands. There's the politics that actually makes use of divide and conquer and try to grab control of the riches, and then there's the music that brings people together. And I think there's sort of an overlap where the music steps on to the political stage, and then we treat the politicians as actually lead singers to the jazz compositions. And I think there's the back and forth movement between the two. That for me was crucial. And the layering, as you say, the layering that you alluded to in the film.
Yeah, no. And just want to show I watched this movie like 3 times already. Swear I watched it on Canopy.
Okay.
It's
Actually,
just
you should then you should slice in some moments in the YouTube clip.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, yes. I love. So when you bring up like how kind of it's like a academic documentary, like Masked is like a music documentary as well, and the fact that this is just as much a documentary about Patrice Lumumba as just it is about jazz, like the jazz movement going around in America and even singers in the Congo when doing this and kind of bouncing back and forth between different perspectives and like I said, making it a jazz documentary, then it's a documentary about Congo, it all comes together though. It doesn't feel all over the place. Was there ever a worry that you may be doing too much and that you may lose focal sight, or did you always have a grasp of like this is going to be one thing?
Okay. Well, there was a lot of worry for 4 or 5 years, but there was also a lot of joy in the editing. So it was both. You think, oh shit, we have a 5 hour cut or 4 hour cut. What are we going to do with that? What do we cut out? And there's beautiful stories. And then at one point we thought, should we make it into a series? But then the momentum of the story reaching towards sort of the end of the film was so strong that we thought, okay, let's make it tighter. And then there's the budget, how many music, we have 52 tracks. How many music can you clear? And that was the biggest part of the budget. But for example, we had Paul Robeson in there. And the story of Paul Robeson also, while he was losing his passport and said, this is not because I was a communist, but it's because I was actually claiming also independence, claiming the rights for 22 million African Americans who didn't have the right to vote, right? And then Paul Robeson was present with Abbie Lincoln during that protest in the Security Council. Amiri Baraka was there, but he never made it inside, but he was still outside. There were more musicians, it was musicians that actually initiated that protest. And so for me, I could not, researching this period, I could not but make the music as a protagonist of the film. I felt like that. And so even with the rumba, when Patrice Lumumba is released from prison, or he goes around in the cité, he hires, Rocco Mambo, and the music is always very close to that whole like sort of way of how politics is committed towards this step of independence. And when he is actually released from prison, is flown over to Brussels for the round table, he's accompanied by African jazz and Joseph Kabasele. And on the spot in the Plaza Hotel in Brussels, they composed the Independence Cha-Cha, which became such a huge hit throughout the whole continent. So much so that, there was in Rhodesia, which later on became Zimbabwe, there was a liberation party called Independence Cha-Cha. But the song also in itself alludes to the whole unanimity of all the political parties claiming that Patrice Lumumba should be released and claiming that independence should be granted 6 months later. And so it's the music very often that sets the stage for, these political openings, but also bringing people together. So for me, I could not include that and even take it a step further. We're making music as a historical agent, the protagonist of the film. And it's with every track, the Abbie Lincoln, Max Roach, that whole album in itself, you dissect the whole album, it has all these relations. Tears for Johannesburg, for example, is inspired by the Sharpeville massacre, the women that sort of were tearing up their apartheid passport in Johannesburg. It was in Sharpeville, and a lot of women were being killed, and so it became the moment that the ANC turned militant. But it was an important moment, but it became the inspiration for Abbie Lincoln, because this whole wave of independence, 16 African countries, gaining independence and are being admitted to the world body of the United Nations. This is 1 week after they overthrow that Mobutu grabs power. You have the 15th General Assembly, this sort of huge, political earthquake within the United Nations where Africa, the Afro-Asian bloc, becomes so important that actually also echoes what's sort of going on with the civil rights movement in the United States. And so all these tracks, of the album We Insist Freedom Now is already in itself, which is it's sort of spliced throughout the whole film. It's actually a recording we found on Belgian television. The We Insist Freedom Now was in its integrity performed on Belgian television 1964. I don't know if it would have happened on PBS, maybe, I don't know. But but at the same time, while the Belgians were in awe with this jazz performance, this activist album on television. The genocide is happening in the Congo. And so for me, the layering, this is 1964, right? So the layering is for me, even, you always have to look beyond what's going on at the same moment. You see things sort of being advocated on Belgian television. On the underside, the underbelly is that, damn, this is a genocide at the same time happening in East Congo.
No, yeah, like I said, I think even the music puts more emphasis on certain scenes. So, um, like I have certain scenes from the documentary in my head that made me want to do more research on that scene, rather if it's because of the music or just the way you highlighted it. Like I've been having that song, the freedom rings, like that's been stuck in my head, or some of the Disney stuff with the vote Dizzy, vote Dizzy, vote Dizzy, that's been stuck in my head. A lot of the songs from the Congo. I don't even speak the language. That's been stuck in my head. So it's like I think I don't. Was it you? Was it a team who sequenced where the music should be at? Because I feel like the music was sequenced perfectly throughout this documentary.
Well, we of course we were ready, but COVID made sort of that we had to push a bit longer. The budget also made that we had to like be very sparse and economical about every track we use. But and then your question about um, I did have a lot of help, of course. Here I am, white Belgian male, da 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 da. I would say privileged, but not privileged, but privileged because inherently being born in a situation that is maybe more privileged, but don't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
I didn't get money with this film. I mostly was working for free, and I'm teaching to actually gain my money. But still, I felt like it's not up to me to tell the story of Patrice Lumumba. I can tell the story of the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. But for me, it was so crucial to offer a platform and a dialogue, to open up the story, to sort of include, dialogue with Nkoli Zombofani, the Belgian-Congolese writer, a dialogue with Yves Blouin, the daughter of André Blouin, who was the Pan-African rebel. And I could hardly find any sort of access to her story. I found sort of keywords of that. She was a witch, a communist, sort of in bed with all the independent leaders, and I thought, interesting woman. And so I researched further, got in touch with Yves Blouin, and then she became an advisor, and then she sent footage, and bit by bit, sort of things grew. But, a film is always very much a collaborative effort. There's the work with the editor, Rick Chobet, with the producers, with the researchers, Judy Alley, who she actually worked with Spike Lee. She was a big advisor on the film when it comes to archives. So it was very much trying to offer a platform and give the voice to actually first-hand experience. Like, for example, Conor Cruz O'Brien, his son is actually using his dad's voice, but he had first-hand evidence of the genocide in North Katanga as well. And so offering a platform, that's why I I have, it depends which film, but I have a bit of a horror of talking heads explaining what's going on. I prefer to offer history itself a platform where it speaks for itself, and often that can be contradictory, but I think the juxtaposition can just precisely open up a third space, which one could call cinema. So for me, that was crucial. That, yeah, of course, it's from a certain vantage point, and the film is made here. But for me, it was also offering a dialogue and open up the whole arena of what's been sort of what the story is all about. And André Blouin was crucial. John Kupufani was crucial. Nikita Khrushchev, for that matter, who was completely mistranslated. I don't want to make him into a hero, because he, what sort of the way he's introduced in the film, he immediately goes off on a tangent, said if you make a faux pas and history will not forgive you, the memory will haunt you forever. It's the image of Budapest. So it's not that we want to make him into a hero, but nevertheless, he's there at the United Nations General Assembly really saying, in the United States, they're lynching people still. There's segregation. Black kids cannot go to school with white kids. And he says it in front of a full General Assembly. It's really amazing. And he really did say, let's bury colonialism. He did not say, let's bury the United States with missiles. He said, let's bury colonialism. He did say at one point, 4 years earlier, when he was denouncing Stalin, he did say at one point, communism will bury capitalism. But this is a very different statement than actually saying we're gonna throw some missiles at you. And so when Dizzy says, all we were saying actually I love you and was mistranslated, he actually is very close to the picture. So
No, I thought that was I thought it was interesting to hear him say like it was almost like him like making awareness of like what's going on in America. It's like, hey, they're lynching black people, they're killing black people. He was like, the what do you say? Like black kids can't even go to school. White kids. You
mm,
call this democracy? Like you call this like a civilized nation? Like how? Like that's crazy. So I did think to see, like you said, like the way that he's
of course now
pictured.
you're very civilized, of course, today.
That's funny. It's like the way that he's pictured in America. It is you don't get that story, like you don't get that story about him in school that like, hey, he once did a speech in the UN where he brought awareness of black people getting lynched. So I did find that interesting that there was footage of him saying that at
Yeah, it
one of
was
those.
for me a discovery too, because that was never translated. I got a Russian student he's from Baku and working with the Ukrainian refugees here in Belgium, but he translated a big part of those speeches. And then if you go to the source and you really do your homework, suddenly you discover things that I thought, wow, this was actually pushed in the corner at United Nations. Even, for example, Fidel Castro, we're talking now 59, 1960, it was still a different picture what was going on in Cuba. But even the whole like speeches that he actually where he defends Patrice Lumumba in the United Nations, which is still the longest marathon talk in the history of United Nations General Assembly, that footage we could not find. That we could not find in the United Nations. We had to go to the Havana archives. So we plucked things from other arenas that would say, maybe there's a reason why we were not able to find that. So
That's interesting.
yeah, yeah.
So do you feel like the United Nations and so for example, when you couldn't find something somewhere, you have to go to another place. Do you feel like some of these places like the United Nations or other places where you couldn't find footage, do you feel like they're like suppressing this information from people?
That's what you call history,
Yeah.
history writing. you know, a lot of like, what's not recorded or not collected or that is not part of history is not being told, right? And so, it's like Voltaire who says, history is the common lie we agree upon.
Mm.
And so you have to dig deeper. I, Andre Blouin's story was hardly told, and now she's written back into history. Her memoirs are being republished just recently, early this year by her daughter, with an addendum because there is some sort of uh, a bit of rewriting happening there as well, where it's re-examining a bit the book of Andre Blouin, the memoirs. But I'm very happy she's written back into history, and we have a couple of screenings here in Matongi with the Congolese sort of community, and I see all these young kids arriving with the book of Andre Blouin. It's amazing. So there's a bit of you have to excavate a bit deeper when you really want to retell the story. You have to dig deeper and go to the first-hand sources, and it's not very obvious, often very obvious. Like Leonie Abu as well, who is the Lumumbist rebel from Kwilu province. Her story is hardly told. There is friends of mine who, via, they know Leonie Abu, who's featured in the end of the film. And she's this rebel, but she talks firsthand about, rapes and killings by the mercenaries. But she's still today very much afraid. We brought the film and we gave her a copy of the film. She lives in Brazzaville, and she's afraid. She thought that she's so much still traumatized. She's afraid of even still being killed by, Mobutu killed her husband. Pierre Moleli was the minister of education, I believe, under Patrice Lumumba, and then he started, after coming back from China, started sort of a rebel movement in the Kwilu province. But it stems much further back to the 31 Pende sort of revolt, where you have to know, even if Belgium took protectorate of Leopold II because it was his personal property till 1908, and then Belgium took over from Leopold II, who gave Belgium a huge big invoice for handing it over. But there was a revolt in 1931 in the Pende province because people refused to work and being exploited for the, the palm industry. And to my consternation, when I read about it, there were concentration camps in Quilu,
Mm.
and people were killed. It was devastating. And so this whole Lumenbist sort of rebellion stems much further back, has nothing to do. Sometimes people have lived through trauma after trauma after trauma in certain provinces in Congo, that actually that stems and gives way to also what's sort of going on today, a lot of Mobutu's, Mobutu as a kleptocrat, like stealing all the sort of a big for all the profits, like his military had to survive in one way or another. And rape and corruption was a big part of how Congo was ruled. So there is something that stemmed and seeped into the soil, but it was already before. you know uh, the rubber dealers, they could all like go and say and claim a woman. Even the stepmom, no, the stepdad in College Ombofani talks about his mom, how his mom was actually, in a sense, stolen, kidnapped by his stepdad, who said, "I want to marry this woman. You could go in the countryside." We're talking, a little bit before the 60s. This is
Mm.
nuts. Well, I think, for a big part in the world, prostitution is still like being sold into slavery. Even, the prison system in the United States is pure slavery. It's a reinvention of slavery. So it's not that those things have not disappeared. It's under another name, comes back under different constellations. But I'm off on a tangent. Sorry, I keep on babbling.
No, you're fine. I thought that was interesting, what you just how you just ended that about like how it's kind of almost like a rebranded version of slavery. I had a sociology teacher who said something to the effect of like if institutions, if they work, if they're successful, they never change. Like they might be altered a little bit, but like institutions never change. So if they find in America, if the institution of policing in their eyes is successful, it's never going to actually change. There might be little tweaks. Hey, we put a body camera on. Hey, we'll put a law here or there, but you're still going to see a lot of black people getting killed by police. You're still going to see police brutality because these are successful institutions in the eyes of the beholder, whether that be the government or whoever. So I do find that interesting where it's like slavery, hey, it was working back then. So it's like we got to tweak it a little bit. We just call it prison. So I think that is interesting the way you worded that is like it's like rebranded. Things is interesting.
Yeah, and the police force, for example, the Sûreté in Belgium, the police force before, they would source because Congo has many provinces, they would source soldiers from an area that is not from the area that has to be controlled. So there would not be any affinity. If something of a change can come, it might come from inside, where some people in the police force are so upset with sort of the exploitation and the shit that is happening, because suddenly they feel like an empathy of what's going on in society, that then suddenly things might actually change. But the institutions are a condensation of a structure which inherently is not about equality. So, but then again, I don't want to be pessimistic, because there's that scream at the end of the film, which is a scream of resilience, a scream of like that life is alive, that actually, being upset with the situation. And I think that's where I really wanted to have the film sort of ending with sort of a note that actually, of course it's a scream and it's tough, and how else can you react to what's going on? But there's still that sense of resilience in the music that actually people don't agree with the situation. So it's not that everything is numbing and paralyzed and
No, yeah, I look at it and like I said, when I watch this documentary or any of your documentaries, because I became such a fan, I was like, I got to watch all this other stuff. So I had to go watch Shadow World, which I thought was
oh, you
phenomenal. It
saw
was
Shadow World, okay.
great, like I went to go look at everything. I tried to find everything I could from double take, short films that you had. I tried to watch a little bit of everything that you did, and even with Shadow World, it was interesting because it's going to sound silly, but as an American, I feel like there's certain things that internationally we just don't get taught in school. You have to go find it yourself. So what's his name? Prince Banar, the prince of Saudi Arabia at the time, and that you covered the film. this was going through my head watching it. I was like, why is there a black guy in Saudi Arabia? What's going on? What is this black dude that's like running stuff in Saudi Arabia? I didn't even know that there's like Afro Saudis or Afro, yeah, like Afro Saudi people, which I found super interesting. That was the first thing I took away just by seeing him. Before hearing anything he said, was like, wow, there's a lot of black people. Because I started googling it, like black people in Saudi Arabia. I was like, there's quite a few black people in Saudi Arabia, which I guess makes sense because of the area. It's like right by Africa. But I just
Yeah,
found that
yeah.
super interesting. I found that super interesting just before even looking into anything else about him. I was like, this guy's black. That's crazy.
But I do think that I'm with Achille Mbembe that actually in our head we're all colonized. You know,
Mm.
it's not about skin. I think it's more about inequality in essence. It's about the means to control. And I think it's actually, if you go back, I think empire uses biology to justify inequality. That's how I think where the skin problem of or racism comes in, you know. Because I had a recent talk with Nkole Jean Bofani, who writes now a book about Haiti. I didn't know there was a Polish cemetery, right? And every Polish citizen can actually claim a passport in Haiti. Why? Because they were fighting with Napoleon against Louverture, against the revolution, the Haitian revolution. And I thought, shit, we fought for the French Revolution. Here we are with Napoleon's forces fighting against the Haitians. But actually, in a nutshell, it's the same situation. So they changed camps. They changed camps. And I think in essence, it's about, you know, I think we're all humans and it's about sort of sharing this earth together. You know, what's at stake is not divide and conquer, but what's at stake is actually, you know, banding together. Also, I think similar to what was going on with the struggle in South Africa. But yeah, I do think it's like what Kwame Nkrumah says, you know, it's about inequality. It's about access to the means of carving out your own life or your own livelihood.
No,
And
yeah, for
so,
sure.
you know,
I
when I always thought it was a funny story.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you,
No, I didn't mean
but
to cut you off.
Maya Angelou was welcoming. He was welcoming Malcolm X in Ghana, and Malcolm X was giving a talk for a whole audience of Ghanese. That you know, it was beyond independence already. I think it must have been towards in the 60s. And then they asked Malcolm X, "Why are you white guy coming to tell us what to do here in Africa?" They labeled Malcolm X a white guy because he has a mixed race skin and everything. And so I think all those labels, I think those labels are used to divide people still. Of course, here am I talking as a white guy, and I know you talked about institutions, and I do know that racism is structural. It's structural. It goes back into history, and of course, all that is tied in. But sometimes, you know, what you do with, for example, André Blouin. She's a mixed race kid, and she said, I never felt that I belonged because I was neither white nor black. You have the whole question with the Métis kids. I don't know if I can say Métis, but we call mixed race kids. But in Belgium, it's called Les Métis. And then there's a whole discussion about the stolen kids because they were neither belonging to a white family and sometimes it's kids of a raped situation, and they were kidnapped. And André Blouin was the same. She was put as an orphan in an orphanage in Brazzaville and ran away when she was 16. But it's because she was a mixed race kid. And then that mama sort of read that and said she was neither white nor black. And she said, "No, I'm 100% white and I'm 100% black." But this is that mama, because also her dad was Belgian and her mom was Congolese, and her dad was killed in East Congo, and then she had to flee. But I think we live in what Nkole Jean Bofana would say the mythicization of the world. So there's all these things are, you know, left is masquerading as right and right is masquerading as left, and then, you know, I think what's at stake, I think for me is of course it's a sensitive discussion, but it's basically also about inequality.
Can you please, if you don't mind, can you go back a little bit and because you're talking about mixed race kids being put in orphanages? Why were they being put in orphanages? And this is in Congo, by the way, right? You're speaking Congo.
We speak in Congo, right? It's before independence. You know, it was a disgrace, right? Because you know the Belgians say, apartheid didn't exist in the Congo, but it was apartheid, and mixed race kids were not allowed. It was illegal. And so, of course, it depends. If you're rich, then you can claim and kidnap Congolese women and then have mixed race kids. But for a big part, it was shunned upon, and they had to be put in an orphanage. And so, or they were unwanted kids, right? And so, when independence happened, the Catholic Church brought all these stolen kids over to Brussels, and there's a huge dialogue here in Brussels about reparation. It's about kids who don't belong. So they, and this is all because again this division of skin, but they lost their very often their relationship with their mom. And if you've been raised and then 30 kids, that you had to trace the history and go back and who was my mom, because they couldn't even find who their mom was. And some have been reunited, but you lost 30 years or 40 years of actually a caring relationship, and you're marked for life. So this is a discussion here now in Brussels. Of course, maybe the articulation in the United States is very different. When it comes to, you have a huge influx of an Afro-P community, Afro-Europeans in Brussels, who actually have changed the debate
Mm.
about decolonization in Brussels. But you have to know, Congo was out there. It was the other outside of the country. It was l'Empire du Silence, the empire of silence. You could not talk about it. And then vice versa, within the Congo, they were kept stupid because when independence happened, there was 2 university students. Congolese were not allowed even to go to university. It's sort of nuts. They were kept stupid, and vice versa. The Belgians were kept stupid.
Mm.
And of course, that debate about decolonization was safe because it was out there. In the United States, because of the transatlantic passage, the other was inside the country. And
Mm.
so the friction and the articulation, I think Belgium is lagging behind in its whole articulation, but the articulation in the United States, I'm not like romanticizing this, but this, because it's a fierce debate, but the articulation happened within, which is a big difference. And
Mm.
in Belgium, that articulation is only recently sort of in a sense lagging behind. And I just got back from France, and they, there it's not even allowed to speak about Algiers because some generals that were involved with Mitterrand and a coup that happened there, the whole Algerian question is not even allowed to be opened up in public hardly in France.
Mm.
But this is of course, you have to localize also the decolonization debate. It's different than what's going on in the United States. Now also there's a lot of changes happening in the United States. Even these things are historical. It's like this is not something that is a finished debate. It's an ongoing debate or dialogue or exchange.
Yeah, it caught my ear when you brought up the orphanages because I don't know. It's like interesting how like people are very similar no matter where the countries and culture is at. Because have you heard of have you ever heard of the 60 scoop in Canada?
Oh, and is that because of the First Nation, that the genocide of the kids?
Yeah, they were basically like kidnapping kids, stripping kids from their family, Native American kids, and putting them in
Yes.
orphanages, selling them in like newspapers and stuff of that nature. And people didn't know
Or
where they're where.
even killing them. There's genocide. The film that was running with us in the Oscar debate was Sugarcane, and it's all about that. Those things are coming out. It was also, by the way, in Australia with the Aboriginal kids.
Mm.
Yeah, it's like it's, and then also you have a sort of a dislocation of your language, of your culture. It's this whole sort of dislocation and sort of homelessness basically. But I think we live in a world that's becoming a homeless world because there's this, what Michael Hart calls this global apartheid. And global apartheid is not walls. The
Mm.
global apartheid is in our head, it's in our heart, and it's like the way we stand in the world. And it's only how many centimeters from your heart to your mind. And you're right. It's like it's so crucial to sort of make that open to be able to talk about it.
No, and that's why I'm glad you made this film. And like you said, I'm pretty sure you had a crazy year, which is traveling and touring with this film. Um, I know it just came out, super recent still. Do you have an idea what's next? Is it a documentary? Is it like what exactly do you have? Do you see coming next after this documentary?
Okay, well, I have a grab bag of teams, but it's called. There's two titles: the Multi-Species Parliament or Tea with the ET. It's also the question of extraterrestrial. But what is the question of extraterrestrial? The unknown, sort of the other again, but it's the imaginary other as well, right? And so, when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was this resurgence in the United States for the call for another imaginary other, right?
Mm,
And that immediately was filled in by Saddam Hussein, the dirty Arab, whatever. And so the now again we were in the middle of a Cold War again, but in the 90s there was the influx of X-Files, the Independence Day. There was sort of a crisis within how sort of mainstream media would define what is othering, what is the unknown. And this is something that I feel is quite crucial, but literally also actually in relation to how we would define consciousness. I know these are big themes, but I feel the big predicament that we are in today is this whole sort of not knowing the relationship to the other and relationship to nature, relationship to ourselves. If you pollute the water, you pollute yourself. But if you sort of render something nature, then you can exploit it because it becomes an object. And maybe we have to rethink what is consciousness, and that maybe everything is related in a way how the whole universe is music and how everything is frequency, that we have to rethink how we stand in relation to one another. And that's including sort of the forest, the water, but also our planets, the universe. So it's also an intergalactic question. So these are big themes, but it's still a grab bag, and I have to condense it into sort of a story. But yeah, this is sort of what I would love to explore, because I think consciousness within sciences as well, it's still a big black hole. Is it part of an emergence at the end of evolution, or is consciousness the basis of everything? Is the fact that relationship, because I do think I interviewed a cognitive scientist on tickling. Sounds funny, but that actually you cannot tickle yourself. Only if you're schizophrenic you can laugh with it, but tickling you can only actually be an experience in relation to. And he says consciousness is very much relational. You tickle, therefore I know you exist. And so maybe I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum from Descartes is maybe very sort of a very small sort of reduction of what reality is really about. Maybe it's more we dialogue, therefore we are. So in a nutshell, this is sort of the theme that actually, you know, that we always stand in a relationship, just as language.
yeah.
Language, we learn a language and then we express ourselves. And that doesn't mean that it actually subjugates the individual, but actually you create your subjectivity in relation to. And that's what I would call sort of in relation to consciousness, what maybe the big focus is of the next work. But how and what, we'll see.
Yeah, I can't wait. This is right up my alley. I'm in school to be a
All right.
I'm in school to be a cognitive behavior counselor. So like that type of stuff that you're saying right now is super interesting to me. Even on a minor scale, this is gonna sound funny, but I think sometimes I'm like, man, I need to go outside and just like put my bare feet in the dirt. I need to touch the grass, become one with the earth, because like you said, everything's connected. And I feel like that sometimes. I'm like, man, I need to go touch a tree. I need to go touch something. Like I don't know. It feels like I'm becoming one with just my surroundings and in nature, and that's super interesting that you're doing that. And like you said, that's such a grand idea. But if anybody could connect one idea to another idea and make it one, it's you. So I'm very intrigued to what you do. I
Okay.
can't wait to see that. I can't wait, man. I can't
But
wait.
it goes back to Shadow World, and Shadow World was like, I was researching that already a little bit with sort of the Margaret Thatcherism and the celebration of the self. There's no such thing as society. That actually everything was privatized. Suddenly, war is privatized.
Mm,
The public function has become privatized to make money, and actually, it's the corporations that dictate foreign policy within the United States. 3 defense lobbyists for every politician in Washington. And so the privatization that happened in the 80s has also reduced sort of again what the music is about in soundtrack, where it can bring people together. And I think it's our biggest predicament, how we stand together in the world.
Well, I can't wait to watch it. Before we get
Well,
out of here, yeah,
well,
huh?
it's gonna take another 5 years before this is.
Hey, I'm gonna be waiting. I'm gonna be at the edge of my seat 5 years from now, waiting for the next documentary. But before we get out of here, I do want to leave you with a fun fact. I don't know if you ever heard this before. I just found this interesting. It's an Alfred Hitchcock fun fact. When
Okay.
since I watched Double Take, I'm like, I wonder if he knows this. So when Alfred Hitchcock made Psycho, the promotion for it was like, be on time. You have to be you have to be here at the beginning of the film. Like you cannot come in the middle of the film. And that was because at the time before that movie, it was very common for people to show up like in the middle of a movie and watch the second half. And then after the second half is over, they stay and watch the first half of the movie. So people were just kind of coming when they came. They weren't coming at the start of the film. But he was like, no, you actually need to start. You actually need to be here when this movie begins. I just found that interesting. I don't know if you knew that or not.
But you know why that was?
Why?
It's because he crossed over from Psycho is a funny mixed genre because Alfred had crossed over to television, right?
Hmm.
And so he was so upset that every 10 minutes he had to break his program and have a cliffhanger because of the commercial break. And so you had to have the cliffhanger because that will take you across the commercial break to the rest of the story. And so he took his television crew. That's why the film is black and white. He had a small crew because he produced it himself. So he tried to make it sort of very economical. But the thing is why you had to be there in the beginning of the film is that he kills his protagonist 20 minutes into the film. Janet Leigh is killed, which is your protagonist. You don't kill your protagonist like 20 minutes in. So he wanted to make sure that the people are there from the beginning because he learned through the commercial break and he freaked people out by killing his protagonist, but he learned that from television because of the commercial break.
Mm.
That's why we have 5 commercial breaks in Double Take anyway. there's another there's another funny story. He got like above his desk there was a quote, two goats chew on a reel of film, and one goat says to the other, I like the film better. Anyway, it's
Hey, shout out to Alfred Hitchcock. But no, I did not know that with the commercial breaks and that's super interesting.
yeah, because it's true that he really wanted them to be there at the beginning, but it's because he didn't want them to miss the fact that Janet Leigh is killed after 20 minutes into the film. That's what
Yeah.
I think. 20 minutes is sort of the plot point where the film is boring, then people run out. But he killed his protagonist, which is nuts. You never do that.
That is hilarious. Hey, I appreciate you coming on. If there's any last words for the people watching, that you have, the floor is yours.
Maybe I pull another joke about Alfred Hitchcock. There was
Are you a big Alfred Hitchcock fan? Would you say?
Well, I studied Alfred Hitchcock for Double Take, right, for all the double gangers.
Before that though, were you an Alfred Hitchcock fan?
Not really, not really.
Yeah.
I also was not a jazz buff, and suddenly, you dig in and try to learn how that could sort of work, and you listen to history. Anyway, there was there was this dad who wrote to Hitchcock, "My son has become afraid of a shower curtain every time he takes a shower, and so he doesn't dare to wash himself anymore." And Hitchcock wrote, "Send him to the dry cleaner." There's
That
always
is,
funny jokes that.
that is a perfect way. That is hilarious. It's a
All
perfect
right.
way to get this. I actually lied. I actually have one question for you because you said you weren't a jazz fan before this really that much. What is your go to choice of music? Like when you are just relaxing, you want to throw on some music. What do you listen to? Because
Oh
like I
my
said, the
God.
music on here was amazing. So like, what are you listening to in your free time?
Oh, okay. So, well, I'm very eclectic. I'm very eclectic. Of course, I knew a lot of the tracks, but I didn't know the political context of all the tracks. Like, for example, John Coltrane, Alabama, you know, you dig in and then you learn Alabama was composed with the eulogy of Martin Luther King's sort of speech at the church for commemorating the kids that were killed in Birmingham. But it's sort of it was a splice over the Quilo bombing when Malcolm X talks about the Quilo bombing that even the UN was involved and the United States government. It was Ford at the time, Eisenhower. Was it Ford? No, sorry, in 1964. Johnson, I think. Um, I blacked out for a moment. No, but it depends. I'm very eclectic when it comes to music. Like in the morning, I get up and put up some Bach, the Brandenburger Concerto, so to relax. But it depends, you know. I used to be, you know, and also it's historical, right? When I was a kid of 18 years old, we used to go to these punk bars and listen to the Sex Pistols. So, so yeah, and I had green hair at the time. It was a punker and stuff.
Really? Are there pictures of you with green hair?
I don't know. I have to dig it up, but
Hey, I appreciate you coming on. For everybody watching, I appreciate you guys. Um, until next time, I say what I mean what I say. Haters gonna hate, players gonna play, and you guys holler at your boy.